$155 billion? That's the estimated total value of American goods currently stuck, rejected, or stranded at the border with Canada in less than a week. You didn't hear wrong, our northern neighbor has retaliated after the White House announced a 35% tariff increase on Canadian goods effective August 1st. And you know what's worse, you might be the one paying the price. This is no longer just a matter between Trump and Carney, this is a matter between two ways of protecting the future, and the American people are caught in the middle of this confrontation. Watch. Now Trump panics as Carney coldly responds, $155 billion of American goods blocked at the border because you need to prepare for this prolonged standoff. Note that this information is compiled from statistical data and is not intended to smear any organization. Canada didn't wait until August 1st, a stunning retaliation in mid-July. In July, the powerful man in the White House declared he would impose new tariffs on multiple nations, including a 35% tariff on Canadian imports, scheduled to take effect in early August. To some, this was controversial news, but to many others, perhaps even you, this was the move America had waited for too long. That tariff wasn't just a policy, it was a promise that jobs would come back, that American manufacturing would no longer be neglected, that after decades of losing out, Americans would finally come first. And in that moment it seemed America held the upper hand. International media reported cautiously, the European Union postponed signing an agricultural deal with the US, Japan, and South Korea. Withheld comment, the whole world seemed to be watching, perhaps they thought Washington had prepared everything. But less than a week later the tides turned, no press conferences. No official announcements. Canada acted first. A slew of containers from the US, from corn and soybeans to aluminum and gas, were held back at major ports and border crossings such as Vancouver, Toronto, and Halifax. Some shipments were stopped for inspection, others were outright denied entry on grounds of failing traceability, purity, or environmental standards for Canada. This was a technical response, but for Americans, especially those who had hoped for a spectacular turnaround, this was a cold, unexpected, and unrelenting blow. What enraged people wasn't just the action but the timing. Many assumed the tariff measures would take effect August 1st, giving almost 2 weeks to prepare, yet Canada didn't wait. They acted first, and they did so in silence. In Iowa, dozens of corn trucks were ordered to turn back in Michigan. Aluminum shipments hadn't even reached factories before being denied at the border. Small businesses were thrown into confusion as contracts were frozen. Those who had supported protectionist policies felt as if they'd been sent to the front line without a shield. You can feel it, that sinking realization, when you thought someone was standing up for you, only to realize you're the one taking the hit first. And the worst part, no one is explaining. The government remains silent. The media is busy analyzing charts. Big corporations already have contingency plans, and ordinary people, corn growers, truck drivers, warehouse operators, are left to guess what just happened. Canada's strike wasn't loud, but it was enough to throw America off balance, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. In the next section we will trace the specific goods being blocked from beef, dairy, and oil, and why this could directly affect your meals, your job, and your family's wallet. The blocked goods, $155 billion worth, with no way home. Initially, many Americans thought Canada would retaliate, but no one expected the blow to come this swiftly and coldly. When the first containers were rejected at the border with the reasoning not meeting import requirements, no one knew exactly what had just happened. No press conferences, no official notices, just shipments forced to turn back, paperwork stamped in red, and a short message, does not meet criteria. And then industry after industry, from steel, agriculture, dairy to meat, were drawn into this spiral. The first industry hit was steel and aluminum. This was the most predictable blow, yet also the most staggering. In Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, where hundreds of thousands of workers rely on metallurgy, everyone thought there was still time to prepare. The government had announced tariffs from August 1st, meaning 2 more weeks to adapt. But then right in July, aluminum containers were turned back at Toronto ports. Steel trucks lined up at the Windsor crossing without explanation. Canada abruptly enforced the green metal standard, requiring documentation, proving the steel came from low-emission processes. Some American companies hadn't finished their paperwork and didn't even know what more was needed. Result: entire production lines halted. The Midwest's farmlands were the next victims. Corn, wheat, soybeans, products once thought untouchable by Canada, were now held up for reasons of chemical residue and lacking carbon traceability. This was no longer about quality, but about new standards, stringent, vague, and nearly impossible for many small farms. Corn prices fell to a 5-year low, below $4 per bushel. Tractors stopped running. Many were forced to liquidate stockpiles just to cover fuel and seasonal debts. What choked them wasn't just the losses, but the sense that the honor of an entire agricultural heartland was being denied. Then came dairy and butter. The blow even harder. Canada had already limited U.S. dairy imports through a complex quota mechanism. If exceeded, tariffs could reach 300%. America had protested, claiming Canada violated the spirit of USMCA. But at least back then, producers knew the rules they had to play. Within now there were no rules. Canada began rejecting shipments that complied with quotas and historical agreements alike. In Wisconsin and Minnesota, dozens of containers of buttermilk and cheese were rejected without detailed explanation. No more arguments about quotas, just silence and returned good slips. This wasn't merely losing a market. This was a fracture of trust. The trust that fair rules still existed to rely on. And then came beef chicken, the pride of rural America. From Texas to Nebraska, numerous shipments were sent back due to missing biopurity certifications or traceability documents that failed to satisfy new requirements. Multi-generational farms were forced to freeze contracts because they couldn't meet criteria that were implemented without any consultation process. People began to sense their worst fear materializing when the Canadian market, once accounting for over 18% of U.S. agricultural food and processed industry exports, suddenly slammed its doors shut. According to preliminary estimates from independent research groups, the total value of U.S. goods stalled, rejected, or withdrawn from Canadian orders has now surpassed $155 billion, a cold hard figure. But behind it are very hot realities: idle trucks, overstocked warehouses, slashed worker wages, and mounting household bills. This is no longer a tariff war between two governments. This is fear creeping into every dinner table, every gas station, every neighborhood, and this is only the surface. In the next section, we'll dig deeper into what's quietly unraveling: shuttered factories, abandoned dreams of reindustrialization, and a public's faith in the America First promise growing shakier by the day. From closed factories to abandoned fields, the story behind the numbers. When American goods are turned back at the Canadian border, the first ones to suffer are not big corporations but very specific people. Farmers, truck drivers, and workers in processing plants in states like Iowa or Illinois. Harvest season is usually a time people look forward to, but instead of delivering corn or wheat to the Canadian market as usual, countless containers are forced to turn back. No clear explanation is given. All anyone knows is that the shipments are being held due to failing carbon standards or excess residue, and when the goods return, no one wants to take them. Farmers have no storage space, businesses have no contracts to offset the loss, and drivers don't know where to deliver the cargo. The entire value chain from growers to haulers feels severed in the middle. This situation has spread to packing plants, steel mills, and especially dairy processing facilities. A small factory in Wisconsin had an annual contract with Canada, yet within a single week, all 3 shipments were sent back. No official paperwork was needed, just a cold, brief notification from customs: does not meet import requirements. Machinery began shutting down. Work schedules were cut short, and workers moved to unpaid leave for those living around the factory, from diner owners to gas stations. Cash flow also started to dry up. A small town sustained by dairy production. From gas stations, diners to part shops does not collapse with a bang, but quietly. Like a tree losing water, everything shrinks. The sound of trucks fades. The now hiring sign at the factory gate is taken down. But what unsettles people more is when even American consumers start to feel the impact without really understanding why. Have you noticed lately some familiar products at the supermarket? The milk you usually buy, the frozen meat you keep in stock, even that cereal box you have every morning suddenly become harder to find, or unexpectedly more expensive. You walk into the store, scan each aisle, and stand still for a moment, not because there's nothing to buy, but because of a vague sense of unease, not knowing what to choose, not knowing why there's a shortage. And then you hear the news: Canada is rejecting American goods over safety standards, product quality, pesticide residues, and emissions. These goods are returned, though still allowed to be sold domestically. At that moment, you, like many others, might wonder, wait, does that mean American products aren't safe enough for other countries? What about us? Have you ever stood before your fridge looking at a piece of meat or a carton of milk and suddenly felt something unfamiliar? Is what I've been buying, what I've been eating all these years, really trustworthy? That small question can make a meal feel slower, not because there's nothing left to eat, but because the sense of reassurance has quietly slipped away. For many older Americans who once believed made in America meant the best in the world, this feels like a quiet blow to their faith. They've worked their whole lives, believed in fairness and quality, and in the reputation of their nation. But when others around the world like Canada reject these products while Americans continue to consume them, even pride begins to waver when consumers no longer feel protected, when they start questioning what's on their table. This is no longer just an economic consequence, it's a fracture in trust, spreading from rural fields to cities, from factories to supermarkets, from wallets to the heart of a nation that once believed itself untouchable. And the more worrying thing is, this is only the first ripple. What happens if the world starts seeing Canada as a model, and all those orbiting America like planets suddenly shift their course? The world no longer waits for America. As new alliances rise for decades, America was like the sun of the world economy, an irreplaceable center surrounding nations like small planets revolved around this orbit, drawing energy, direction, and opportunity. It was once believed without America the entire system would turn cold dark and grind to a halt. But then something unexpected happened. Canada became the first to change its orbit, not through grand declarations, not with political banners, but through handshakes quiet but decisive with other economies. While American goods piled up at the border, the Canadian government announced the start of free trade agreement negotiations with Mercosur, the South American bloc comprising Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. This wasn't a hot-headed reaction, it was a long-term plan prepared since the beginning of the year. Simultaneously, Canada signed an FTA with Ecuador, accelerated talks with the EU, and pushed forward agricultural supply chains and renewable energy cooperation with ASEAN nations. In each agreement, America was absent and not even mentioned in the battery and EV industries. Canada chose strategic alliances with South Korea, Germany, and Indonesia, countries leading in materials and clean production, in pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. Canada accelerated bilateral agreements with India and Europe, fully avoiding dependence on American factories, and in agriculture, once a field reliant on the U.S. as the main supplier, Canada is now turning to partners with low carbon standards and no growth hormones. Step by sector, Canada is redrawing its own supply chain map, a map with no America at its center. America's dilemma: change or be left behind while the world races to redraw trade maps. America now stands at a crossroads where no familiar signposts remain, and the road ahead may no longer be as wide as before in the past. Low prices were the decisive factor, but today the rules have changed. People seek clean supply chains, traceable origins, low-carbon environmental compliance, and respect for human rights in Canada. Once America's closest sibling is the first to firmly take this new path. They shake hands with Mercosur, they strengthen ties with the EU, they find ways into ASEAN. Meanwhile, American goods are now associated with phrases like substandard, high GMO, and lack of transparency. For many older Americans, those who lived through the era when the US made the rules, this feels like an unexpected turn. Back then, we led because we had technology, standards, and strength. But now, as American products are rejected as agreements are signed without Washington's input, questions arise in everyone's heart. If we don't change fast enough, will the world leave us behind? Two paths lie ahead. One, America accepts that it is no longer the default center and begins changing from within, from how cattle are raised, how products are made, packaged, transported, traced to how we protect the environment and respect global standards. It's a hard path, but with enough courage we might reclaim our position too. We continue reacting as before with barriers, tariffs, and hoping others will come back, but today's world is no longer patient. They don't announce severance, they quietly change course in America. Once the central circle will gradually be pushed to the edge, maybe not this year or next, but every agreement without America's name, every return container, every factory forced to shut down, is a sign. And for you and me, those who have lived long enough to know how quickly the world can turn, this is no longer just macroeconomics. It's a worry. If the world no longer needs our products, will our children still have jobs? Will the next generation grow up in an America still respected by others? No one can answer for us, but clearly, if we want to be seen as a major player, America cannot sit still and hope the past will return. Maybe you once thought the USC relationship would always stabilize, that even if tensions rose, they would return to the negotiating table, but this time, Canada isn't waiting, not compromising. They closed doors, returned goods, and moved on without looking back. The question now isn't what will America do, but what will you do when everything familiar slowly fades away, when the milk you drink, the meat you eat, the steel you once forged is no longer welcomed by the world as before? Do you still believe America leads, or is it time we take a hard look to avoid being left behind? Don't let silence be the answer. This video does not promote division within the United States, nor encourage secession. All content is presented with the purpose of exploring, analyzing, and sparking discussion based on current events, emotions, and social trends. We respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal regulations. This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today analyzes what made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.